So, another important brief we filed this week, and it's not, we didn't file this week, we filed it some time ago, but the Supreme Court hearing was this week, and it was in a case about what is called asset forfeiture. And essentially what asset forfeiture is, forgive me my non-legal definition of it, is that the federal government, to the degree it was able to do that, but mostly states, will seize assets of criminals outright and then use them for whatever purposes they deem worthy. And you don't need to be convicted of a crime for the assets to be seized. Sometimes it's appropriate. For instance, a lot of drug dealers drive around sometimes with a lot of cash in their cars. And the cop pulls them over and they see they've got $50,000 in bills in their cars. They have all the indicia of drug activity going on. They say, well, you know what, we're going to take this cash, and if you want to litigate it, you can litigate it. And of course, being the drug dealers, they rarely litigate it because they know they've been caught. But on the other hand, you have people in this case, in this Supreme Court case, where it's abused. And frankly, many people would think the situation I've described is still abusive, that this is a person's property. If the government wants to seize it, there has to be a court's order to do it before it's seized. But either way, this gentleman in 2013, Mr. Timbs, T-I-M-B-S, was arrested and pled guilty in Indiana to a charge of drug dealing and conspiracy. He received a 6-year sentence, 5 years of which were suspended, and a $1,200 fine. Earlier in the year, Timbs had received a $70,000 life insurance payment after his father passed away. He used $42,000 of it to purchase a Land Rover car. Tim used the Land Rover to deliver $225 worth of drugs. So this is another aspect of asset forfeiture. They seize vehicles and instrumentalities of criminal activity. The state seized the car under a state policy which allows private lawyers to sue for a forfeiture in order to receive a cut. The car was worth 4 times the amount of the maximum possible fine in the Timbs case. So essentially this is the lower courts in Indiana ruled that the penalty was grossly disproportionate under the 8th Amendment, which prohibits excessive fines. The Indiana Supreme Court reversed the lower court's ruling, and now the Supreme Court's deciding whether that's appropriate or not. So Indiana came in and said that whether or not you like the Indiana law, the Constitution doesn't require that Indiana provide the protections that Mr. Timbs is seeking. And what Judicial Watch has said, no, that's not the case. We said if it's allowed to stand, the ruling will allow state and local government abuses of forfeiture laws to continue, adding that freedom from unlawful conversion of property is an inherent individual liberty right which the Constitution must secure for all of its citizens. The 8th Amendment's excessive fines clause must serve as a check against state forfeiture laws. Many states and local governments abuse their powers to seize government property. You know, I testified a few years ago, actually it was 4 or 5 years ago now, to New York, the New York State Assembly. And you know, in researching my testimony, I found that in a recent analysis, 85% of NYPD forfeiture cases, the owner of the seized property is never charged with a crime. I mean, that necessarily suggests there's something wrong. Now, we believe, and this is something that is more interesting, that the 14th Amendment, the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment, that citizens can't be deprived of the privileges and immunities of citizenship, would negate the Indiana abuse of law that we're talking about. So the Supreme Court heard this case the other day, and by all accounts, it didn't go well for Indiana. So it looks like we might be for a change on the winning side of this issue. We file amicus briefs sometimes knowing it's unlikely we'll succeed in persuading the courts one way or another, but we think it's important to stand fast on behalf of the rule of law, on behalf of the Constitution. So that's what we did in this asset forfeiture case.